This week on A Lively Experiment, for more than 30 years, A Lively Experiment has brought you the good, the bad, and the ugly of Rhode Island politics. Today, we talk about those extraordinary years as Rhode Island PBS celebrates its flagship program's 30th anniversary.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by
the Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.
For 30 years, A Lively Experiment has been helping us understand the most important issues facing Rhode Islanders. Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr., and I'm proud to be a sponsor of this great program.
Joining us with their insights, the former hosts of A Lively Experiment, Steve Kass, Jim Hagan, and Dyana Koelsch. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 30th anniversary edition of A Lively Experiment. I'm Jim Hummel, the new kid on the block. This week, we celebrate 3 decades of a show that has been the signature program here at Rhode Island PBS and featured many memorable moments since 1987. Over the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear about some of those moments from my 3 predecessors who have shared this chair with me. So welcome, Dyana and Jim. Thank you. We've got a lot of collective years here. And Steve Kass, I've only been in this chair a year. I've got 17 more to go to equal your record.
That's right.
So let's talk about those early years. Susan Farmer, who, of course, well known and was leading the station at the time, came to you in 1987. What did she tell you?
She had an idea for a show for Channel 36. She had some people in mind to staff it, if you will, and wanted me to be the moderator since I was a radio talk show guy at the time.
You were over at the old building on Mason Street,
you
right?
bet. I almost went there this morning.
It's good we brought you over here. So the initial thought was you wanted a good, strong panel. So tell me about that original panel that you had.
Well, we had Mike Van Leesten. I'm sure many folks remember him. We had Tom DeLulio, former Lieutenant Governor. M. Charles Baxt. I think he worked for some newspaper that you're now writing for again.
Yep.
After all these years. You've been recycled.
I have.
And, of course, Lila Sapinsley, who was just a treasure here in Rhode Island.
And so you had the same panel, unlike a little bit of what we're doing now. That core group carried you for many, many years.
They did, but we also had guests. You know, if somebody was, big in the news that day or whatever, we would have an additional person, or we'd have a guest fill in if one of the panelists couldn't be there.
So, Jim, Steve gets the call from Governor Carcieri. He says he wants to come and have him as communications director, and you get a call from Bob Fish.
I get a call from Bob Fish, the former president of public television, a great guy, and he asked me if I could, because Steve was leaving, could I fill in for 5 weeks? Those 5 weeks turned into be 5 years, very exciting and memorable years.
And so what you told the 5 weeks until they looked for somebody else, and then what? It just week after, were you thinking week after week, I'm going back to the golf course, or what happened?
No, I just kept, I would like to go back to the golf course, but I just kept doing the show. And Bob, I was always very impressed with him. At the end of a show, we had a different kind of a setup. We had different panel members all the time. Like in the course of the years, we had 4 former governors on. We had legislative leaders. We had members of Congress. We had all sorts of political and business leaders, and municipal leaders. Like one of my favorites, of course, was having Buddy Cianci on the panel. Always very humorous.
Never a dull
Never a dull moment with him.
So they finally give Jim the pass to go back to the golf course, and then they call you. How did that come about?
I think I had been one of the guests.
You were, you're right.
A few times, and along with you. I remember you and I guesting together. And I think I had stopped working at Channel 10, where I'd been a long-time reporter, and they'd asked me if I would be interested in coming back and hosting. I think you were off away on vacation and taking one of your many trips, and I said, okay, I'll fill in. And then I don't know, and then it kind of morphed into taking the seat as the moderator. I would say that from my perspective, the reason why I really liked it, I remember as a reporter, and perhaps you have these same feelings, I remember always there was so much that we couldn't put into our stories, and really feeling like when I left there was so much that I didn't know anymore. And I really thought that this was a great opportunity, this show in and of itself, and still is, a great opportunity for people to see all those things that we leave out. You know, as journalists, you were always kind of the gatekeeper, and now as a public relations professional, I know how much additional information there is that people don't get to hear, and this is it was a great venue to be able to get reporters in and have them tell us what we didn't get in their stories because of the, you know, and also even though we have now the much broader way to get information, we still have, I think it's still very useful to get an overlay of that information based on people who have context and have some institutional knowledge. So that was really what I liked about it.
And if you look at the composition, I mean, you came out of television, I did. You had your own Sunday show. Jim, you were in the state Senate, but you were a businessman for years. So you didn't really have, you brought politics, but you didn't really have the broadcasting side.
I never had the broadcasting side. My daughter works for Good Morning America in New York. She's a broadcaster.
She give you tips when she's home, or what?
She actually does. And she was kidding me about some of the shows that I did do. But I think that a lot of the time, Steve doesn't recall this, we were talking earlier. I did a 5-minute segment on WPRO. He didn't recall that for 1 year. And
he didn't have any memory of that.
He didn't. I lived in North Smithfield. I'd be running down 146. I pulled my car over. I had no idea what he was going to ask me, and we do a 5-minute segment. And I mentioned earlier as well, I said, yeah, this is probably not doing very well. But I got a call from Jack White, who was living in the Dartmouth area, and Jack called and said, you know, Jim, I love that 5-minute segment. I said, you're probably, Jack, the only person that ever told me that, but because you're a Pulitzer Prize winner, I'm very flattered and honored that you call me.
But they kept asking you back. Let's talk about that early panel, because I'm intrigued that you had, everybody tuned in because it really was must-see television, and you had Charlie and Tom and Lila and Mike, and then John Hackett came later. Tell me about those early years. They were really at each other. I mean, there were some ideological battles on this set.
You think?
Yeah, well, it didn't start on a set, did it? It started in chairs.
Oh, sure.
Right?
But, yeah, well, Tom and Charlie were really the antagonists for the most part. They couldn't have been more opposite. And Charlie was a master at goading him. And, you know, Tom was very happy to respond. And he could be very acerbic. And Tom was also a great athlete, which was another. He didn't like Charlie Bax. I said, why don't you like him? Because he never played ball. And with him, if you didn't play ball,
you're an athlete or you're not.
You really,
right?
You were no good. So, but it was fun. It really was a great panel. And Lila Sapensley was really a gift to this state. I'm not sure too many folks even still remember her. I'm sure Diana does, but I mean, she really had a lot of impact on politics here.
Right up until her final days.
That's correct.
She was doing good work.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to serve with both Tom and Lila in the state Senate, and they were certainly different.
Yep.
What about that time that they almost came to blows? Can you tell that story for me?
Yeah, Tom said something, some reference to the Nazi Germany or Hitler, whatever, I forget. And Charlie exploded, saying that he was trivializing the Holocaust and kind of implying that he was anti-Semitic, which of course he was. So now Tom sat on my right. And Tom's a very physical guy, great athlete, as I said. I think he's about to get up and whack Charlie right on the set. And I feel him to my right standing up. Now, he's not standing up for any other reason than he's going to whack him. But I had my right hand on his knee, anticipating what was coming, and was able to keep him down.
Would have been great TV, but you wanted to keep things together.
Yeah, it was would have been ugly had that happened. Although for ratings, by today's standards, would have been great, right? Everybody said, yeah, let him go. But anyway, no.
You know, it's funny, we morph into now, we're in this beautiful studio. I've got a clock where I can see how much time we have left. Back in the old days, Jim, I remember coming on with you that they would hold up the cards, right? And so there was a little bit of juggling. I remember a couple of times you didn't leave exactly a lot of space at the end to say a lively experiment, and right as you were saying continues, they would cut out. You remember that?
That's my lack of broadcasting experience, I suppose. And I also mentioned, you know, when I first started that, I was sitting where you are, and I lost my earpiece. And thank God for Dave Lehman, who was sitting on my right. I reached down, I said, I'm talking, and I can't hear the producers getting back to me to explain to me.
Maybe they were loving what you said. They didn't need to talk to you.
They probably were in wonderment. I reached down, and there were a whole bunch of wires, and Dave finally retrieved one, and we got it back in my ear, and then the show rolled on from there. But that's the lack of broadcasting experience, I guess. But I found the whole thing a lot of fun. and I like the panel to have fun. And I think we did have, with the mixed panel, I tried to get a conservative on one side of the panel and a liberal on the other side, or progressive on the other side if we could, because it really helped make lively television.
Because otherwise everybody's singing off the same sheet of music. Yeah. And you did that a lot. You'd have some theme shows also you do about health or educational, which would play to your strength from what you'd done in television, right?
Well, what I really liked was that kind of ability to go in depth on issues that even when I was a television reporter, we didn't have the opportunity other than some Sunday morning shows. And also we would always try, of course, to balance it out. And I remember doing shows, during the course of my 5 years on Lively Experiment, we had all the race issues going on. And it gave I think, a really good opportunity for our viewers to see something different. And I think one of Rhode Island's real strengths is that we were able to bring together our police community, our general community, and also like Jim Vincent from the NAACP, and be able to get those people sitting together and not a personal attacks, but really kind of sort through those types of issues that I don't think anybody else was really doing. Certainly the newspaper could do it because they go more in depth, but in broadcasting, it's really hard. General broadcasting doesn't give you that ability.
Give it to me in a minute 5, right?
Right, and so you lose a lot of that contextual information. And to get them sitting together, you realize that we're all part of that one community. And as opposed to butting heads, sure, there were differences, of course, but to see that we all have that commonality, I think that was I really enjoyed that kind of discourse.
Talk about, and people, long before we see these talking heads tables now, you tune into CNN, there's like 43 people on the panel talking about the election. This, to me, was groundbreaking because you were able to pick and choose. Talk to me about chemistry of the panelists on the show. Yours were a little bit different every week. You had some guests in, but talk about that and why that made it special for you.
I think we did, and there were a lot of adversarial opinions. Sometimes I would try to lean a little bit. If I had a liberal on too often, a progressive on too often, I would try to find a Democrat from the House or Senate.
Did you find any in Rhode Island?
Yeah, well, John Brien was a good example of that, who was a conservative, I think. And when I was a Democratic state senator, I was a conservative. But so I think that the balance to me was important. We always had a media and an academic person on the panel as well. So that also helped balance it and helped bring some sense of piece to the panel as well.
Steve, were you the balance at times because you kind of knew what you got, but as a broadcaster and somebody who certainly expressed his opinion on the radio, you sometimes were unpredictable, were you not, and where you came down on an issue?
Sure. Well, I was walking a tightrope in a way because talk radio is very different than this program. And remember, we always had to be aware that the legislature funded the station. So I was a big foe of the legislature generally from day one. I even sued them to take away their illegal pensions. So I was not exactly, I was probably the most hated media person by the legislature. Would you say, Jim?
I'd say so.
Yeah, probably. And they still hate me.
You were Charlie. I didn't know who came first.
Well, that's true. But so I walked that tightrope. I tried to really, I didn't want to, I had 3 hours on the radio every morning, so I got to do in-depth stuff like, Diana's talking about it every day. So this program was more of a, for me at least, it was about informing the public and and we had such a distinguished group. You couldn't have had a more knowledgeable bunch of people about Rhode Island in general and politics especially. So
tell me about the politicians. It was must-watch TV, was it not?
They all did. Matter of fact, many of the programs we did, Governor Sondland has them in the archives at URI, which I discovered not too long ago. Yeah, they never missed it, and we would send tapes to the senators and the representatives. They watched it every week.
Were you surprised how many people watched? Of course, I was at Channel 6. We struggled in the ratings compared to Channel 10, so people knew you. I'd be at Channel 6, and somebody would say, "Hey, I saw you on Lively Experiment," occasionally. So, were you surprised, or did you expect that audience?
I was not surprised, and I think I agree with Steve. I think that a lot of the legislators, having served with a lot of the legislators in both the Senate and the House, that they did watch the Lively. And they probably framed some of their opinions on that. When I was in the Senate, Tom DeLulio was the president of the Senate, and Lila was the minority leader. And I always thought Tom, as much as we would disagree on issues, was very fair. I had to override a bill, a governor's bill, I authored some legislation to on solid and hazardous waste. We had a couple of Superfund sites in my district. And the governor, unfortunately at the time, Governor Gary, he vetoed it. And we had to go back to the Senate. And fortunately, like my adversaries in there were like Rocco Quattrochi and John Hawkins, and they had been away from the Senate that day. And so I moved to override the veto at that time. And then I thought Tom was very, very fair, because normally he might have been on the other side. But he was very fair and allowed it to proceed, and we did override that veto. So I think people do watch that and listen to all of that.
Did you find that when you were out in the field, people would be like, oh, I saw that program you did on Lively?
I did, because I had been out of, I haven't worked on Channel 10 for 18 years, but I had still had people would still recognize me, and I think, how is that possible? But I think that a lot of folks would say, I will never miss that show.
You know how Rhode Island is, Diana. I left Channel 6 like 3 years later, and people would go, like, I love you on Channel 6. I'm like, have you been watching the last 3 years? So there's a little bit of a lag time.
And
sometimes.
I also think it speaks to the value of the show, that we would put requests in, and a lot of politicians would come. A lot of times politicians will, if they don't think they're going to get a fair shake, they may boycott. They may say, I'm not going on that program. But they would like to come on here. And from my business, if I have a client, I would love to put them on this show. It's not that you're going to get 100% questions in your favor. It's not going to be an easy one, but you're going to get a fair shake. And that, I think, speaks to the history of the show.
Well, and you hosted 10 news conferences. I had 6 news on the record, but that's a little bit more of the old Tim Russert model. Right. It's one-on-one. Right. Here, you never know what's going to come from the panelist, right?
I remember once we had Senator Rhode on, and I had Mac Owens, who was a war professor at Naval War Academy, where you and I had done some work as well. Very conservative guy, writes for the Wall Street Journal. He's down in Washington now. And Senator Reid came on, they sat next to each other talking about, and they differed strongly on foreign relations and on issues of defense, but it was courteous, and they both had really good points of view. I think it's different than some of the discourse we see now politically, which is a little bit sad because it becomes personal, and that's hard to sort through. It gets a little personal, but it doesn't have to all be personal. I think that creates a disservice.
As you watch shows now, and you're still plugged in, you've been doing radio your whole life. As you watch other shows, do you sometimes think, sitting in the moderator's seat, say, boy, I wish, these guys, when we had it at Lively, does it ever kind of run through your head as you're watching other shows the way you did it in the show you had?
Well, my reaction to a lot of the stuff on TV, especially things like Meet the Press and some of the stuff that I enjoy, they made a comment about, gee, the Republican Party is now 2 parties. So where the hell have you guys been since Rockefeller? It's been 2 parties. So, they say things that don't make much sense to me. But yeah, I have a lot of emotion when, I was pretty passionate about politics, still am. I get 5 different newspapers every day, which costs a lot of money today, unfortunately. But anyway.
And the newspaper industry thanks you for that, because they're losing people every day. So, Steve, you may be single-handedly keeping people alive.
No, it's really a shame, because you can't beat a newspaper. You really can't. The scope of the New York Times is read worldwide. Worldwide, everybody who's anybody in any country in the world sees it. And I haven't been too pleased with obviously Trump, a lot of angst about what he's been up to. But when they crucify him every day, and it's been every day from the day he announced in the Times and the Washington Post, I'm not happy with how the world sees that, and that they think our president is a joke and an idiot and mental illness and all the other stuff they bandy about, which Jimmy Carter pointed out the other day, I thought, rather eloquently. So I'm not happy with that.
Is this like the former president's gathering as I'm looking forward? I'm looking at the moderators together.
That's right.
The same picture we have. Jim, it was funny. I was thinking about my history when I first came on Lively. I just left Channel 6, and somebody invited me on. I had my own show there. And I don't know if you remember this, but somebody said, I came on and they said, and so Jim Hummel, what's your outrage? And I said, you know what? I've worked in this market 25 years. I had my own Sunday show for all these years, and it took me leaving my job to come on Lively Experiment. That's outrageous. And the look on your face was, first of all, was like, who invited this guy on? Is he really outraged? And so, Jim, you were always a diplomat and a gentleman. But I think back, and then they invited me back. So.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Diana, because I have never asked the person to be on it declined, ever. Whether
that
it's Jack
interesting?
Reed, they're all on. The
never
whole
did either.
congressional
Did you have
delegation.
anybody? Sometimes they were clamoring to get on the show, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And same with you?
Yeah, oh yeah. People would come up to me, senators, whatever.
Yeah.
Why don't you have me on? We always had people asking to be on. I'm sure you do too.
It's interesting when Jim said that I didn't remember interviewing him every morning or every week, whatever it was.
Every week.
I forgot he was head of the chamber. And that's why you were there.
Yeah.
And now I remember it vividly. But you became such a well-known figure on television on The Lively Experiment that
Well,
he
I was
just
talking to Jim.
overrided the entire chamber.
As I had a conversation with you, I was talking with Jim, and he said, now, I had 27 years at Tupperware, and I ran for the North Smithfield, and I was a state senator, and I said, Jim, that adds up to 108 years. How was that? Was any of that concurrent?
The reason is now, of course, if you in the General Assembly, you can also have your own job. Now, Dyana could run, I suppose, if you wanted to run. Steve could run if you wanted to run.
Diana's like, I don't know about that. I didn't
I don't
sign
know
up for that.
So I think that that's why while I was working for Tupperware, I was also a member of the Rhode Island State Senate.
There was a little concurrent sentence involved there. It was not
Yeah, and
consecutive.
there were other people up there like that. Raytheon always had people serving in the General Assembly, and Textron had a few
Teachers
people.
that are in the General
And
Assembly.
by the way, since this is Rhode Island, we used to play together in the summers in Barrington as children.
Did you really?
Amazing, yeah.
It is
yeah.
Rhode
Wow.
I lived right next door to his cousin Alan, and was in bar mitzvahs. I did the whole thing, I was a Catholic kid from the
That was back in the 1840s?
Yes, yes, it was.
Hey, so let's do, we have a little bit more than 5 minutes left. Let's talk about maybe some memorable moments you have. I don't know if anything stood out. Well, you could probably go on. We'll do the second half with Steve just for the next half hour. But anything stand out in your mind? You had an 18-year stretch, which is, you didn't remember Hagan was on with you, but maybe you'll remember something from those shows.
Well, one of the memorable moments when Susan Farmer, who always had a problem getting enough money to run this operation, since most Rhode Islanders would send money to Channel 2 and not sending the money to Channel 36, which aggravated the heck out of me. But anyway, that probably still goes on, I'm not sure. But so she was always in a begging position, unfortunately. And when Sondland was governor, he started to cut that budget really dramatically. And I can remember one day that she actually threw herself on the hood of his car and wouldn't let the car go until he would make a decision on the budget. That was an emotional moment.
Wow.
But she did it.
And he came through.
As he did.
All right. Anything else on your mind?
Oh, I could go on for days. I don't
All right.
wanna-
We'll come back to you.
Take
Jim,
off.
do you have any memorable moments?
It just, again, the most memorable moment was just having the opportunity to do this and to share the experiences with others. I think, going back to what Diane said, even labor leaders who I often would disagree with, and I found to be very friendly people, very nice people, and trying to be cooperative with people and try to still get that message across. You mentioned earlier the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And there's certainly a lot of the indifferent as well. You try not to be too negative. You try to be positive. I'm a positive person. I like to be positive. At the same time, there's a lot of issues out there that the state, Rhode Island, more probably negative than positive, that the legislative and political leaders need to take a hard look at. I came prepared with a list of those things that I thought were the most interesting shows we did, and most of them are very controversial. And I apologize if they were too controversial, but that's what I like.
I don't think any need to apologize because I think that's what the viewers, that's what kind of stirs the drink, right?
Right.
And I think setting up the panel now will get your most memorable, but you and I have been more working with producers that every week we think about, okay, who is going to be on here because we don't want everybody singing off the same sheet of music,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
What about your memorable?
I'm not really sure that I would say there's one. I'm kind of with Jim on that I don't really have one memorable moment. But we did I think that we tried to kind of stretch a little bit. We did some remote shows, which was kind of fun. We did a Common Cause show where we actually went out and taped it, out in the community, which was something different for us. We tried to do some just one-on-one pieces, just trying to push the envelope a little bit and think about ways to make sure that we were always kind of being current. Because, as you said, the time frame from holding up the time cards to getting an electronic clock. I mean, just think about all of the other things that happened so quickly from when Steve was doing it to when you're doing it now, with social media, with with all of the digital age, with just being able to get on the air immediately, all those pieces where I think just the change has been so rapid, and trying to stay current and also be a real strong value, I think has been one of the great gifts. And just my final thought on this is that I think PBS and Lively Experiment specifically is an amazing, amazing gift for Rhode Island. You know, where it's a place where you can still get unencumbered thoughts. You don't have to worry about, and I never felt pressure from the General Assembly or anything when I was the host. You don't have to worry about getting a sponsorship or getting some paid person that sometimes commercial TV, a client.
They're upset with some story or
and
something.
And next thing you know, the story's getting, so this is something that is really so valuable. And during the time that I know we struggled a lot with trying to break away from that state funding so that we could be more independent. Just make sure we dug our heels in on that. I think it's really remains a very, very strong asset for the state.
I think one of the things that you always try to get across too, and this remains the same in spite of the Lively, who've done a great job in focusing on the issues, but the fact that Rhode Island is still one of the top 3 worst places in the country to retire. Now that I'm retired, I think about that. I also think about the fact that Rhode Island is 49th in the country for business atmosphere. I blame the General Assembly. I think you can do a lot of public relations, and the governor's certainly doing a lot of that. And you can promote the state. But at the same time, the only way you can change those numbers is through action by the General Assembly.
And that, I agree with that completely, and that was, of course, the theme of what I did on the radio for 100 years. But, just public relations is not going to do it. We need people to think when they vote, and we need people to come forward and run from the business community. Other states have that. We don't. We have very few people with a business background in the General Assembly. No big companies that'll, kind of help fund all that.
And Steve,
until that happens, we're doomed.
You're right. People think it takes a lot of money to do it. You
No, it
don't.
doesn't.
In 10 years in the Senate, I raised $5,000. So you don't have to raise $35,000, $50,000 to have a seat in the General Assembly. You have to have some good shoe leather, and you have to pound on doors. It's something you can do locally, but you can't do statewide.
And social media is a big factor now,
Yeah,
too.
it is.
Just quickly, going around, we have about a minute left. What was your favorite part? What did you like most about doing Lively?
I liked the same thing I liked being a reporter. I liked learning. I loved being able to sit in that chair, get people in who were smarter than me, more plugged in, had more information, and learn.
Smarter than you, Diana?
I'm so curious all the time, and I just love being able to hear.
Instinct.
It's just what I am.
Jim, what did you like?
I agree. I subtly trying to get my point across through other people's voices.
Great. Steve?
And I got the opportunity to interview thousands of the world's leaders, public figures, authors, 3,000 books in the basement, eating up space, things like that.
Yeah, you're never going to be able to move, right? Because you've got so much stuff
too much
in the
trouble.
thing.
And what's your favorite?
My favorite is the same as you, that we work very hard to get a panel together, and then they just mix it up, and it's unscripted. You never know. And you know what? It's the fastest 30 minutes in television because it's over. Steve and Jim and Diana, the former moderators. Thank you. It's been an honor for me, and it's been an honor for us to have us in your living room every week. We appreciate it. And as we like to all say, a lively experiment continues. Have a great week, everybody.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by
the Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.
For 30 years, A Lively Experiment has been helping us understand the most important issues facing Rhode Islanders. Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr., and I'm proud to be a sponsor of this great program.